back to Big 550 KTRS.
Thanks, McGraw. Good to be with you.
It's scary almost how similar it was back to 1991, isn't it?
Yes, it is. It's a rerun. I've seen this before, and it is very, very familiar.
Did we learn anything from 1991?
Well, yeah. I mean, I think really the big thing isn't who's going to be on the Supreme Court. The big thing is what's happening to a human being. And I saw this with Clarence Thomas. You know, he was a friend of mine. He worked for me when I was state attorney general, and he was close to me, and he went through this. And I was with Clarence at the time and saw just how it broke him. I mean, he was sobbing, and he was in the fetal position and all of that. And so it's somebody with a really excellent reputation, and suddenly that reputation is shot.
Yeah.
And as Clarence said at the time, this is a stain that he would never get off. And I feel so sorry for Kavanaugh. I mean, there's just the pictures of him and his wife and his two little girls when this was announced. And then he goes through the hearing, and everybody says, oh, you have such a wonderful reputation, and you're such a good person, and he was a coach and served food shelters and just the kind of human being he is. And now everything that he built, all his reputation, is just trashed, and it makes me very, very, very sad.
You know, it's almost like there is no, everyone's going to be partisan, and everyone's going to look at this through their partisan lens. And if you don't like the judge, you're more apt to believe her. If you like the judge, you're less apt to believe her. That's no way to get to the bottom of something like this. And it's no way who has the wisdom of Solomon to figure out if she's telling one side of the story and this guy's categorically denying every part of her story. How are we supposed to know?
Well, it's in a political setting, McGraw. This is, every member of the Senate Judiciary Committee, every member of the U.S. Senate is a politician. And if this were a legal proceeding, then he would be represented by counsel, and the lawyer would have an ethical duty to zealously represent him and protect him. But the Senate is not a court of law, and there are no real procedures. There's not only not due process, there's really no process at all. It's just a political thing. And the politics are that if people defend Kavanaugh's politicians, then they're going to be politically vulnerable, particularly in the Me Too era. And we saw that even with Clarence Thomas. I mean, Alan Dixon, a Democratic senator from Illinois, voted for Clarence Thomas and lost his next election. So the politicians aren't into zealously protecting somebody else. They're looking over their shoulders about the effect on them. So Kavanaugh is in a very, very tough situation now.
What you're alluding to is that the people who are charged to investigate this can't give a true representation or a true picture for either her or for him, because they have different masters and they have a different agenda than the two sitting there.
They're not objective. And as I said, say somebody's life is in the balance, and that's true with Kavanaugh, and it was true with Clarence. Everything that makes life worth living was just in the trash can. Say that happens to an individual in normal life. Well, there are courts, and you go to court, and there is a presumption of innocence. You start with the presumption of innocence, okay? There's no such presumption here. There's no presumption which says that if the facts are in a balance, the person who is accused prevails. That doesn't exist. And then the right to counsel and the right to take depositions and to prepare a case and to be confronted with your accuser and on and on and on, all of the protections that exist for somebody charged with some terrible crime, horrible, horrible crime. They get all of these presumptions and all of these protections, and this is not true in a political setting, because unlike a lawyer who has an ethical duty to defend his client, a politician is basically protecting himself. So it's a very, very different situation, and it's awful to see somebody go through this, and that's what makes me sad. And you just wonder, is it worth it? What's happened to these Supreme Court confirmations? I mean, first Bork, now then Thomas, now Kavanaugh, and it seems like about half of the, at least Republican nominees to the court, go through this terrible, terrible ordeal where I am absolutely sure that Kavanaugh is saying to himself, I wish when President Trump had called me, I had said no. I wish I just turned it down, because this is affecting my life, my wife's life, my children's life, everything that I have worked for decades and decades to build the sterling reputation. That's what I care about, my reputation, and it's shot.
Let's take it out of the Brett Kavanaugh for just a second, and I know you and other former reform politicians love to talk hypotheticals, but if it turns out that a judge has done something inappropriate when they're in high school, does that automatically disqualify them for being on the Supreme Court in 2018?
Well, let's say hypothetically it's a heinous thing, and the charge is heinous. Okay, it's terrible. It's just terrible. But do we believe that what somebody was at age 17 or whatever, 16, 17, do we believe that that is the same person that exists at age 54? Don't we believe that people evolve? Don't we believe even for criminals in rehabilitation? Don't we believe, do progressive people, liberals, do liberals believe that there is no rehabilitation, that people who did something when they were 17 should be forever doomed, that they shouldn't be rehabilitated, they shouldn't have another chance? So I think, okay, let's assume that, and I can't, you can't assume one way, you have to presume innocence, really.
Right.
But say in a hypothetical case, somebody does something terrible when a kid, and say drunken, say the person was drunk and did something awful. Does that forever tarnish that person's life? Should it forever tarnish that person's life? So it's the human thing, McGraw, that bothers me about this, and is it worth it? Is this something that's gone absolutely terribly wrong with this whole confirmation process? And are we now at a state where who's going to want to be nominated for the Supreme Court?
But to your point, though, it's gone off the rails. Republicans are the ones now calling for these hearings, right? It was Kellyanne Conway at the White House saying this woman needs to be heard. She doesn't need to be intimidated, right? It's one thing for Chuck Schumer to be saying it, but for the counsel to the president saying it, for Roy Blunt to be saying it, that's a different realm altogether.
I think that, especially in a Me Too era, it's something that any politician would have to say of any party. I mean, you couldn't say, well, let's forget about it. So, no, I do understand it, but I do hope that whatever happens at this hearing has more of a process to it than the Clarence Thomas fiasco. I mean, that was just a food fight. There weren't any rules at all. It was just dumping stuff out there. And even Arlen Specter, so he he was supposedly asking tough questions of Anita Hill, and he told me he wasn't acting as a lawyer. He wasn't asking the probing questions that a lawyer would. He's a politician. He has to watch his own flank. So let's hope that whatever happens next Monday is more of a legal process. Let's get some lawyers involved in this, asking the questions, and not have a bunch of politicians in 10-minute sound bites playing to the cameras.
Yeah. On a side note, was it Judge Ginsburg who was taken off the court, or at least the confirmation hearings taken away because he admitted to smoking marijuana when he was in college?
I have very vague recollection of that.
Yeah.
But I don't know about you, McGraw, but I don't consider myself a terrible person, but would I like on nationwide TV a thoroughgoing exploration of my life when I was a high school student? No.
Yeah. No, it's a great point. I think there, but for the grace of God, go any of us, right? I mean, we don't know what happened in that house back in Georgetown in 1982, but we've all been in situations where we're not proud of, and we've done things we're not proud of, and it's a learning process. And so,
it's the totality of a person's life, isn't it? I mean, shouldn't you be thought of on the basis of the totality of your life, and not just a snapshot, but just who are you and who have you been, and that was the thing about this. So supposedly the Democrats in the Senate had this well before the hearing. In July they had it, well before the hearing. And yet at the hearing they don't want Kavanaugh on the court, okay? They think that they don't agree with his jurisprudence,
right.
Okay, that's fine. But as far as Kavanaugh, the person, is concerned, and the coaching and the food pantry and all the good works he was doing, my memory of the hearing was that they were going out of their way saying, while we don't agree with you, you're a good person. You're admirable. You are an admirable person. And admirable to them, and certainly admirable to the two little girls, his two little daughters. And now they have to see all this. That's what's so sad about it.
Yeah. It's an impossible question, and I know. Last question for you, Senator Danforth, and we'll let you go. I know you're all over the place in the last couple of days because this has brought up all the Clarence Thomas stuff. With hindsight of 27 years in the Clarence Thomas thing and the Anita Hill thing, ultimately there was a story I was reading this morning. The polls at the time, 54% of Americans agreed with Clarence Thomas at the time. I don't know what the polls will say this time, but what do you take away from that time with the Clarence Thomas and Anita Hill?
Well, I think that I think that if you looked at it from the standpoint of Clarence, this really kind soul, and if you looked at it just from the standpoint of Clarence Thomas, you look at it from the standpoint of Judge Kavanaugh and all the good works he's done, you look from the standpoint of the individual, you think, gee, this is a good person. On the other hand, once politics gets in it, and especially even more so today than back 27 years ago, when it's, Me Too and all of that, and all of these terrible things that all these men have been doing to all these women, in Hollywood and in businesses and all of that, and then that taints it all, and that really changes a presumption of innocence into a presumption of guilt. And that you're sort of tarred with this awful brush of awful behavior of men toward women, and so that's the situation I think we're in now. That the kind of judgment about a person or as a person's heart kind of transforms into this terrible misogynist situation of men and women and so on, and that's what it becomes, and that's what's going to make it very, very tough for Judge Kavanaugh.
Stay tuned. Senator, good to see you're doing so well. Thanks for checking in. Have a good day.
Okay, thanks.
Yep.